Welcome back to Grimverse History, where we uncover the strange and forgotten sides of history. Tonight we follow what happened after the daggers fell, and how Rome answered the men who killed Julius Caesar. The men who stabbed Caesar did not die as heroes. One by one they were hunted by fate, fear, and each other. Some fell by the sword, some by despair, and some by their own trembling hands. You step onto cold marble still stained dark. The Senate House smells of iron and sweat. Echoes of shouting linger in the air. If stories like this help you unwind, gently like the video, subscribe to Grimverse History, and turn on notification. It's the year 44 BCE. Rome has just crossed a line it can never uncross. The sky over Rome was overcast with grey, and nothing suggested that world history was about to irrevocably change its course within the next few hours. In the theater of Pompey, the Senate waited and 23 dagger thrusts ended the life of gas. Julius Caesar, you stand among the marble columns, feeling the air thicken as the blades fall. The conspirators, led by Marcus Brutus and Gas Cassius, symbolically washed their hands in the dictator's blood and stepped out onto the streets of Rome. They expected cheers. They expected to be celebrated as liberators who had saved the Republic from tyranny. But instead of applause, a deafening silence received them. The doors of houses were bolted, and the alleyways emptied as if the city itself were holding its breath. This silence was not a sign of assent, but the harbinger of a storm that would shake the ancient world to its foundations. What the senators, in their aristocratic delusion, had failed to recognize was the power of the people and the legions who worshipped Caesar. The murder on the Ides of March did not bring back freedom. Instead, it unleashed Rome's vengeance. A merciless manhunt began, one that would span years and continents until the very last of the assassins had paid his price. The ancient historian Suetonius later recorded a chilling conclusion. Of all those who wielded a dagger that day, none survived Caesar by more than 3 years, and none of them died a natural death. You can almost sense the fear spreading, moving faster than any army. The fate of the conspirators was sealed the moment two men forged an alliance. Antony, Caesar's experienced general, and Octavian, the dictator's very young grandnephew and heir. Together with Liberators, they formed the Second Triumvirate, an alliance based not on friendship but on cold calculation and a thirst for retribution. To finance the war against the murderers and to eliminate political opponents, the Triumvirate resorted to a tool of absolute terror, the prescription lists. Anyone whose name appeared on these lists was an outlaw. Their property fell to the state. And any slave or citizen who killed a prescribed person received a reward. Rome sank into a bloodbath, such as the city had not seen since the days of Sulla. Hundreds of senators and 2,000 knights fell victim to this purge. It was the bloody overture to the campaign against Brutus and Caesar, who had fled to the east of the empire to gather their armies. But even before the great armies met, vengeance caught up with the first conspirators. One of the first was Gas Trebonius. He had played a crucial role in the assassination by engaging Mark Antony in conversation outside the Senate door, preventing him from rushing to Caesar's aid. Trebonius felt safe as the governor of the province of Asia, but he underestimated the reach of Caesar's avengers. Publius Cornelius Dobella, an ally of Antony, tricked him, gained entry to the city of Smyrna by night, and captured Trebonius. His end was gruesome and intended as a warning. After days of torture, he was beheaded, and his head was kicked through the streets by soldiers in mockery. Even more tragic and emblematic of the betrayal was the fate of Decimus Brutus. He is often forgotten, yet it was he who had personally persuaded Caesar on the morning of the assassination to go to the Senate despite the warnings of his wife Calpurnia. Decimus had been one of Caesar's closest confidants and was even named in his will. His betrayal weighed heavier than that of many others. After the murder, he attempted to flee across the Alps with his troops to join the Republican forces, but the soldiers' loyalty belonged to Caesar's memory. One legion after another abandoned him and defected to Octavian and Antony. In the end, Decimus wandered alone through the forests of Gaul, disguised as a Celt. A local chieftain whom he had once gifted captured him and sent messengers to Antony. The order from Rome came without hesitation: execution. The head of Decimus Brutus was sent to Antony as a trophy. The first of the main conspirators had fallen. The inevitable climax of this drama, however, played out far from Rome. In October of the year 42 BC, the largest Roman armies the world had ever seen faced each other on the dusty plain of Philippi in Macedonia. While Brutus surprisingly overran Octavian's camp and put his troops to flight, Caesar suffered a crushing defeat on the other wing against the militarily superior Antony. Caesar retreated to a hill to survey the battlefield, but the dust of war clouded his vision and his judgment. You stand with him on the rise, the air thick, the horizon blurred by movement and fear. He saw a group of horsemen approaching him. They were messengers from the victorious Brutus, coming to bring him news of the success on the other wing. But in his pessimism, Caesar mistook them for enemies coming to capture him. In this moment of despair, driven by a fatal error, Caesar made his final decision. Believing all was lost, he ordered his freedman, Pindarus, to end his life. Fate's irony willed it that Caesar had himself killed with the very same dagger he had thrust into Caesar's body 2 years earlier. When Brutus reached the hill a short time later, he found not his comrade in arms, but only his corpse. Through tears he called him the last of the Romans, knowing full well that with the death of Caesar, the spirit of the resistance was also broken. For 3 weeks the remaining armies stalked one another. The supply situation became critical for Brutus, and the morale of his officers sank. You feel the nights grow colder, the silence heavier, as waiting becomes its own kind of punishment. It is reported that in the cold nights before the second battle, Brutus was haunted by grim visions. A gigantic silent shadow is said to have appeared in his tent, Caesar's ghost, prophesying that they would meet again at Philippi. Whether this is truth or legend matters little, for the psychological burden of the deed weighed heavily on the shoulders of the last leader. On the 23rd of October, the second battle of Philippi took place. This time there were no tactical successes for the Republicans. The battle-hardened veterans of Antony and Octavian broke through the lines, and the battlefield turned into a slaughterhouse. Brutus, realizing that any further resistance was futile, retreated to a rocky height with a handful of loyal followers. He knew what awaited him in Rome, the shame of being paraded in chains in Octavian's triumph. He wanted to preserve this last bit of dignity. You can feel the wind on the stones as the sun lowers, the noise of battle fading below, in the glow of the setting sun. Brutus quoted a verse from a Greek tragedy. Poor virtue, you were but a word, yet I followed you as if you were real. You stand close enough to hear his breath steady, to sense the final resolve settle in his chest. Then he asked his friend Strato to hold his sword, and he threw himself onto the blade. Mark Antony, who despite everything felt a certain respect for Brutus, had the body wrapped in his own purple cloak and ordered an honorable burial. Octavian, however, showed no such leniency. According to reports, he had Brutus's head severed to be sent to Rome and thrown before the statue of Caesar. Yet the sea claimed its own tribute. The head was lost in a shipwreck on the return journey. You can imagine the waves closing over it, history sinking briefly into silence. With the death of the leaders, organized resistance was broken, but the hunt for the remaining conspirators continued. One by one they were tracked down. Casca, who had struck the very first blow against Caesar, likely fell in the turmoil of Philippi, or chose suicide shortly thereafter. Simba and the others, whose names hardly anyone knows today, met violent ends. Some were betrayed by their own slaves, others murdered in their sleep by bounty hunters. The Roman Empire was vast, but it wasn't vast enough to hide from the wrath of the Caesarians. There was, however, an exception, a man who evaded death longer than all the others. Caesar of Parma. He had been one of the assassins and managed to stay alive for years through skillful shifting of alliances. After the defeat at Philippi he fled, joining first the son of Pompey and later even Mark Antony, when the latter fell out with Octavian. For 14 years he lived on the run, always looking over his shoulder. You can feel the tension of those years, every footstep sounding like a summons. But Octavian, who now called himself Augustus and sat enthroned as the undisputed ruler of the Roman Empire, had a long memory. He had sworn to avenge the patricide, and he tolerated no unsettled scores. After his victory over Antony in the year 31 BC, he sent one of his deadly specialists to Athens, where the last surviving murderer of Caesar believed himself to be in deceptive safety. Caesar of Parma was sitting at his desk writing when the assassin entered his room. With his death, the final chapter of the Edicts of March was written. The circle had closed. The men who murdered Julius Caesar on that fateful March day acted in the belief that they were saving the Republic and restoring freedom. Yet their act achieved the exact opposite through the power vacuum they created and the civil war that followed. They paved the way for the very thing they feared most, monarchy. They killed a dictator only to enable the rise of an emperor. Rome's vengeance was not only bloody, it was marked by a bitter historical irony. The old Rome of the senators had perished in the flames of the civil war, and from its ashes, under the leadership of the vengeful Octavian, rose an empire that would dominate the world for the centuries to come. Caesar's spirit had in the end triumphed over his murderers. Somewhere a torch flickers out, iron cools in the night air, marble corridors remember echoes of fear. You can almost hear Rome breathing again, slower now. And like all great cities, Rome keeps moving as the centuries fall back into shadow. The weight of ambition loosens its grip. If this journey stayed with you, if these quiet echoes lingered, you're welcome to leave a gentle sign, a like, a share, a soft subscription for future nights. Thank you for walking these ancient paths with us. Goodbye, and we will meet again.